Hi, Alfred. It's Mrs. Wallace. I just wanted to do this quick video for you. It is just a recap of some of the things that we talked about in class on Monday when you were absent. A few things. We did highlight a couple of topics that came up during the discussion. Notably, you challenged some of your peers during the discussion regarding, the concept of unity. And so I think you did well in the discussion because you were, kind of assessing the way that Charlemagne, on one hand, maybe gets credit for unifying his empire, but then there's definitely some questions about that. Very much historians have had similar discussions about Charlemagne and his legacy. One topic that didn't come up as much during the discussion, but I just wanted to clarify it because sometimes it gets confusing. Sometimes Charlemagne is referred to as King of the Franks and King of the Lombards because he conquers other areas. Sometimes he's also known as Emperor Charlemagne, emperor of either the Frankish, empire or sometimes the Holy Roman Empire. So, what is that and how and in what way does that happen? And it can be a little confusing. So, a little bit of a backstory, and it relates to Charlemagne in the year of 800. There's a pope at the time of the Roman Catholic Church, so definitely an institution with a great deal of power. We know that Charlemagne himself did some work almost on behalf of the church in terms of trying to make the practice of Christianity a little more uniform. So if you go back to that smart history video that you watched for homework one night, there's some element of connection between Charlemagne and the Roman Catholic Church. But the Pope, Pope Leo III, is unpopular with some people who are critics of him and really blame him for some very unsavory acts. And this gets around, and there's discussion against Pope Leo III. And there are people who actually, come after him physically, threaten to harm him and cut out his tongue and take down his, kind of role as Pope. And Leo III reaches out to the Franks because the Franks were long the protectors of the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church at this time is almost seen as like a military, kind of component. They have need for protection because they have lands and things like that. Pope Leo III calls on Charlemagne, who goes into the area of Rome and meets with Pope Leo III and the people who were criticizing him. And he hears everybody out and decides that Pope Leo III is legit. So Charlemagne kind of acts in a way that he's adjudicating the situation, and he's going to, lay down the law that the Pope should stay. And this has repercussions that on Christmas Day of the same year, Charlemagne does. Hold on one second. Somebody just came in. Yeah, did you lose something or? I haven't, but you can totally look around. I'm sorry if it's not here. I haven't had class since you all were here, so. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Good luck. Yep, yep, yep. Sorry, Alfred. I'm just going to keep on going. I apologize. The significance of this is that the Pope calls Charlemagne down on Christmas Eve to come to a mass, and Charlemagne is told that he is going to be crowned, the Holy Roman Emperor. And so, this begs a lot of questions because, on one hand, it gives the Pope seemingly quite a bit of power because the Pope all of a sudden is crowning, political kings and emperors, and that kind of creates a bit of additional power for the Pope that was not originally on his to-do list. It also elevates Charlemagne's power. Really, after this event, there isn't necessarily any additional land or peoples or powers that Charlemagne has. It's just he's been given this particular title of Holy Roman Emperor, and it kind of suggests almost like a Roman Empire part two, and it creates this entity of the Holy Roman Empire, which, according to a lot of historians is neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire, but the name kind of sticks, and we see the Holy Roman Empire in the area of modern day Germany on the map, for some time. So it's worthwhile to just get a sense of that. You can see the image with Charlemagne, bended knee in front of the Pope. This gets a lot of play amongst Christians at the time because it seems like it gives Charlemagne some additional kind of roles as per the church. He's clearly a Christian king. And one of the things that makes this very significant, in addition to the elevations of power, maybe arguably for the Pope and for Charlemagne, despite the fact that Charlemagne says he doesn't want this crown, he takes it, and for the next 14 years he will be Emperor Charlemagne. The Byzantine Empress, Empress Irene, is very antagonistic to this notion that, the Roman Catholic Church, which applies in the Byzantine Empire at this time also, there's a, kind of an anger that there is an emperor of the Holy Roman Empire when the Byzantines largely see themselves as the Roman Empire and they already have an empress. Why would there need to be anyone else? So this sets up some divisions between the Byzantine Empire and the Church, and the Byzantine Empire and Charlemagne. And those divisions, stick, and we'll see that as time goes on. The other thing that came up, and I think this came up a little bit more in the discussion that you all did in class, was, the way in which Charlemagne's empire collapsed. There is no doubt that his empire crumbles, in the decades following his rule. How and why that happens is, up for debate, whether or not it was really the rule of Charlemagne that was kind of the game changer, and he was able to keep things together, and then when he died, everything changed. Also, the Franks have this like very interesting tradition where they give land to their next of kin. And in the case of Charlemagne, he had one son upon his death, and he gave his crown and his land to Louis the Pious. But Louis the Pious had three sons, and so Charles the Bald and Lothar and Louis the German will end up fighting over the crown and over the land. And by the time we get to 843, there had been so much infighting that there is a treaty to resolve some of the issues. And certainly, the empire that was once, one political entity is dissolved by the time of that treaty. We see Charles the Bald establishes what is known as West Francia. That is basically modern day France. Louis the German establishes what becomes modern day Germany, and the part that tends to be called the Holy Roman Empire at later points. And then Lothar, who's like the official empire, but ends up, with a very small piece in northern Italy. But in any case, the symbolism of this is that, historians kind of really debate what caused this and how much this is the result of feudalism. Like, does feudalism actually start under Charlemagne, where he starts partitioning off his land to people who are going to rule after him, essentially a whole bunch of nobles in his court and sons and things like that? Or are there other external forces? And that's where we bring in the invasions like the Vikings, but also the Magyars and the Islamic Empire. At the same time, there's a weakening of Charlemagne's empire. There's also external forces that are invading, and kind of begs like a chicken and the egg question. Is it that Charlemagne's, empire is crumbling because of these invasions, or is it the invasions themselves that are easily, successful in places where governments are weak? And that's where we started to use the Reeve source and the Annals of Saint Bartine. And so I think you were there yesterday in class. But, notably, a few things about the purple lines. The Vikings are probably the most distinct of the group of invaders because they do the most damage, especially in places like Paris. But the Vikings notably come from modern day Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. They were not just one group. There are many, many groups of peoples that kind of fit under this category of Vikings, different cultural groups, maybe you could say the Norwegians had a very different geography than the Swedes, and so ultimately, what Vikings might have been looking for, or why they, go to raid, and all those different things might have been different. Different Vikings travel in different directions, but we can see Vikings participate in a whole bunch of activities, notably trading and raiding, right? And they also settle. So a couple of quick things. Sometimes you'll see in sources the Vikings referred to as the Norsemen. And, just to go back to this earlier slide for a second, the green lines are the Magyars. That's a group of people who come from Central Asia, but ultimately establish a kingdom known as Hungary. So, like modern day Hungarians, kind of peopled at this time. The Islamic Empire also makes inroads into parts of the area off the coast of Italy and in Italy itself. Those are significant, but we'll look at that when we look at the Islamic Empire. A couple of things we know about the Vikings. We know a little bit about them because of the archaeology that they left behind, a lot of artifacts that were in wooden ships, for example. We know quite a bit about their religion and their way that they saw the world. Much of this comes from understanding Norse mythology, experts who focus on that, and also the Viking sagas, which are not really documented history, more like kind of, tales and fables, but they do speak to some of the values and ideas and happenings of Viking life. So you can learn a lot from the Viking sagas. They are compiled later on. The Vikings did not really have a written language other than Viking ruins, which have some markings that historians have worked with. The culture is fairly communal. There is a chief of a Viking village who largely hosts dinner in a large, great hall. So Vikings spent some quality time seated together, especially for meals. But some Vikings would be in the upper class, known as jarls, close to the chief. Carls are the groups of people who might be farmers or might be artisans of some kind, and slavery exists in Viking society. Some of the enslaved persons are Vikings, and some come from outside, part of raids. Of course, we know the Vikings are very seafaring people. They are accelerating technology of ships. And one of the things you'll see in the other video clip that I sent you was about Viking ship technology and how some of the ships have this gift of being able to go in very shallow water. And so they're able to, kind of traverse rivers as well as the open sea. They travel to England and to France. They devastate parts there. They also will travel into Russia. Likely the Swedish Vikings will go into Russia and settle there. They trade quite actively as far away as Constantinople. We see a lot of Islamic coins that end up in places like England, for example, or Scandinavia. So we know that the Vikings were involved in wide, kind of networks of trade. If we wanted to look at the settlement, you could just kind of look at this map. You can see by the 700s and the 800s, if we look in Scandinavia by Norway, Sweden, Denmark, you can see where the Vikings started out and where there was settlement. Ultimately, some of the settlement moves northward. So there was likely some type of resource shortage that enabled the Vikings to get motivated to raid and trade. It's not exactly clear whether this was a result of climate change or some other type of, famine or resource shortage, but it appears around the 700s and 800s, right around the time that Charlemagne's reign is ending. We see the Vikings also starting to move and settle where you see the red, okay, and where you see the yellow. So we definitely see settlement in England. There's a time when England is basically run by what's called the Dane law because there's so many Vikings who are essentially in charge. You can also see Normandy, a space where in the Frankish, kingdom or the former Frankish Empire, there's a space of Vikings, and the Normans will ultimately travel to England and become the leaders of England. You can also see the orange with the Rus, so the Swedish Vikings make their way into Russia and settle. Everywhere you see the green or coastal areas where the Vikings raided. Okay, so keep some of that in mind. I'm going to stop there, check out the video, but just add some notes about the Vikings. Okay, be well.